I've recently moved from the United States to Australia, and I have a background working with Dryad and disciplinary data repositories, just to give everyone a sense. Moving to Australia, I found that the approach to data sharing and data management policies is very different. It's very much on a national level. So I have students coming in talking to me about, I'm interested in data management, I'm interested in looking at policies in Australia, and then there's this assumption that the rest of the world does it exactly like Australia. So how do we move beyond these kind of national understandings of what data means and data management policies are to come to these standards that can be flexible with cultural differences, and yet we can still share and have a better understanding as information professionals? That's the hard idea. That's the big question. So what is your take on that?
So Holly, thank you for your questions. And I just have to say, I loved working with Holly. So it was just great. We are so lucky to have collaborated. So I think one of the things is having conversations like this, being able to share what we're doing. I really applaud the Research Data Alliance effort because it is international and there are people coming together from many communities. It's never going to be a one-size-fits-all. So we have these assumptions in our project about the GSK is never going to put their data in the Drexel repository if they're going to get that message that I got. There's no way. I haven't done an international study to say that maybe that would happen in another country. I don't know. Maybe that's a mandatory thing, or there already is a protocol. And so I think, how do we address that? We need to have more and more conversations. We need to share information about our successes and what went right, and we need to share about our failures. You know, failure analysis is really important. Why did it not work out? What can we learn? What would have made it work out? And if we can work on sort of admitting where we're not doing good, not doing well, I think that goes a long way. So it's some thought. I'll continue to think about your question. Thank you, though.
Thank you very much for your talk, and I enjoyed very much. And my question is a bit general question. So in the middle of your presentation, you mentioned that good metadata, because I'm a metadata person like you, so I have interest in that. So do you have any criteria for measuring the good or poor?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all in the metadata community sort of point back to the famous Hillman and I'm going to forget the other name piece, right? You know, the criteria of consistent and, gosh, you put me on the spot, but there's those 6 criteria, consistency, understandable, you know, following standards and so forth. I think those go some way, but as Holly will tell you, we found out you can have consistently bad metadata. My overriding criteria when I teach about metadata and I talk about metadata, I think good metadata is metadata that satisfies the function for which it is intended to support. So if the metadata is intended to support discovery and it successfully supports discovery for the constituents that it was intended for, then it's good. If the metadata is supposed to support provenance tracking and it does it, then I'd say it's good. So the ultimate measure is it successful in supporting the function it was intended to support? And so that's my driving measure, and I would say I'm not the only one who says that. Another person who writes about the functional approach is Miguel Cecilia from Spain, and we both sort of have found each other's work, and so does that pass your test? Thank you for the question, though. Yeah. So yes.
Thank you very much, Jane. My first reaction is, wow, this is very advanced for us in this part of the world. In Singapore, we are just starting out on this, data management practice. At University Library just launched its data repository, and Schubert is the guy who is my colleague in charge of overseeing the library. And I'm proud to say I was the first one to deposit data in this data repository. But when I hear what you say about the collaboration at the institutional level, I say, wow, will that even happen in Singapore? First, at the institutional level, it's hard for us to get data from another institution because everybody is so protective, and but we have, I have encountered some of the issues that you raised at a personal level, at an individual researcher level. So I've been having a dialogue with my library colleagues and doing this data management and repository. What I'm bumping up against is the institutional review board, the ethics review, right? And so when I'm going to collect data, involving people, I have to fill up this very painful institutional review board. And when I fill it out, I want to make sure that it goes through, right? It takes, I don't know, a couple of months for it to come back, right? So in the past, I used to say, I will just destroy the data in how many years, right? But now I'm getting a bit braver, and I say, okay, I will not destroy it at all. I will be permanently, I will keep it permanently. But then I'm wondering, what will they allow me to put in the data repository? So I tell them that I will just put aggregate data. So I have been talking with my library colleagues, why don't you discuss with the institutional review committee to come up with these legal templates, to tell us, okay, these would be acceptable, rather than for the researchers to kind of guess what would be acceptable. So I've shared with them a couple of my IRBs, my ethics, so that they can share with other people, and also as a basis for sharing with, discussing with the ethics committee. Okay, the second comment I want to make is that now I want to share my raw data with the data repository, right? And I want to tell them that they can only show aggregate data, in the system. But I'm concerned about these, rogue nations, hackers, right? So even with your, repository, if they can hack into Clinton's mail server and various, government, I'm not sure that I can trust that, various, hostile nations will not be able to hack in and get all your raw data, regardless of whatever legal agreements that we have signed with you.
Thank you for your questions and comments. So I think I was at I think it was 2 years ago, I was at a Department of Energy workshop, and it was called Big Data on the Long Tail. And one of the people participating there said, we're in the Stone Age with these questions. I like to think, well, maybe we're in the Bronze Age. But we have many hard questions to keep us busy. And, I think that we're going to solve some of them. Some of these problems, we're waiting for the killer app, the killer application that all of a sudden is going to solve. And others are going to continue to be complex, and we're not going to address them all. I have a few comments, though, and I really appreciate you bringing up IRB, because I think I struggle with that, and we all do. And within this project, I didn't mention it here, we've gotten a little support from the Sloan Foundation as well for Sam, actually, the doctoral student. She's what's called an RDA, Research Data Alliance Fellow. And so she's working also a sort of pilot project on what would be a checklist to include in IRB that would help expedite that struggle and that long form, and also educate our IRB about the link between data repository or data sharing issues. It's a very short-lived project, and the Research Data Alliance is very much into having outcomes. So I think if we can come up with just a preliminary checklist, it's something that would need to really involve continued research. This is more like a, one-year student project, but it's something that was recognized as important enough. The other thing I wanted to comment on is you said parts of the world are just coming into this data sharing where other parts have been at it for a while, and Govinda was mentioning the UK. The UK is probably, I want to say, one of the more advanced collectively areas in looking at data sharing. And there are some benefits to coming to something later. And I like to think about online catalogs in this example and how early on when online library catalogs came about, particularly in the US, schools like Carnegie Mellon University and Northwestern University, they just jumped on board, and their computer science departments built these things. And Melville was built at University of California, and they put so many resources into building these things. And then all of a sudden, the standardization happened, and the commercial vendors happened. And yes, the commercial vendors cost money, but it was like the dust settled and the good stuff came out, so that institutions that came on board later, or like even today, you're buying your first online integrated online library system. There's been already good thinking, intelligent people, I want to say, cutting through some of the hard problems, and so you can benefit from the, I want to say, early wisdom of the crowds. So it's not, it is what it is. The one other comment about sharing data, and particularly in this context of sensitive data, I recently visited National Science Foundation. Just to, I stopped in to talk to some people about how our project's going. And when you do that, sometimes other program officers come and visit, and they had actually moved to a new building, and they were busy unpacking boxes. And so some people who I had never met were like so happy to get out of their office and come talk because they were tired of unpacking. And one of the program officers brought up, why don't you just have a place where the industry has their data, and you can share your problem, and they can run the algorithm or the thing and share the results with you. And so there's other ways of addressing this. And in fact, I have learned that GSK in particular has sort of a public interfacing where there is some data they're sharing that already has the PII and sensitive information that I didn't know about. So I think that they may serve as a model, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. This is not all going to be digital libraries addressing these challenges. And so how can we also share what we know to help industry or government and in this way? So thank you for your comments and questions. So there was another Songpan, and I forget you. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
And after. Thank you.
Jane, thank you very much for your talk. Very inspiring. I actually have one quick kind of, not sure, you probably have thought about it in the process of your research, but when we talk about something more secure, especially in terms of privacy or sensitivity, I think sensitivity is time dependent. It's like in particular time,
Yes.
At the moment, or when we do redactions of
Yes.
certain kind of information, it's sensitive at the moment.
Yeah.
But then 10 years from now, then that should be public.
Right.
So I'm not quite sure how are you going to deal with that, or have you put that perspective in when you design the system or the licensing? Because I think that's a very, when talk about open science, right now it should be restricted. But then, 50 years from now, it's all public domain, so everything should be open. Then I think that's something that I think could be more complicated in a sense. The other things that I could capture and then kind of reflect on what Govinda has just mentioned as well is we tend to think about what we are dealing in before as the end product of article or books or physical things or something that coming out as a scholarly effort. But it seems to me that right now we are working on the process. We're trying to capturing the process in order to prove that we are open. So it's just, so as librarians or people who work in the libraries, so I think it's a kind of shift in the way that we think about how we're going to do that, because it seems to me that especially what you are doing right now, you are trying to provide a platform for people to do, to accommodate them in the process of doing scholarly effort. So I'm not quite sure that in terms of the text of particularly if you're, for people who are interested in education of library and information science. So that means, do we have to prepare our student to not just know about the end product, but also about the whole entire process of producing data and involving scholarly, like communications and activities in the more details, so we could capture in every single step, from data collections to management to analysis to do everything about the whole entire process. So yeah, that's my comment.
Well, thank you. So great questions, and some of what you're asking relates to what Binda was also commenting on. So on the first one, have we thought about the time measure? And so if I went back somewhere, we talked about expiration date. I think, sorry to go through this. Termination, destruction of agreement, and so forth. So we're definitely thinking about that. And there are different, this also falls under policies, and so having a system that allows you in an agreement activity to, what did we do here? So duration of use and allowing for expiration. We could also think about actual policy, and so there are existing policies, like my father was a dentist, and there is a policy about 7 years. You have to keep the records for 7 years. So let's say he was sharing dental records. He had been involved in research in periodontal disease. That policy could be input in a system where you sort of do a drop-down menu, 7 years, or it's the so-and-so policy. This will take time and money to input, and we're not going to, this is a 3-year project, we're not going to answer everyone's problem, but I think these are really important questions, and we can learn from what we do in our test environment. Your other question about what we should be teaching and thinking, as I said, it relates to Govinda, and the archives and special collections community has been at the forefront of understanding sort of life cycle management of assets long before the digital world. And my own experience, I was a librarian, I have an MLS, and before I went on for a PhD in information science, and I worked at the New York Public Library. I was a cataloger in special collections, and all of a sudden the internet came about in special collections. And everyone's talking about provenance and acquisition, like it's all new of digital data, and I'm like, we've been dealing with this for a long time. So I think we should not underestimate the archives and special collections community and what they bring to the table of digital asset management, digital data management, whatever you want to call it. And as we move forward in revising curriculum, what we're teaching, it's really easy to say, this is outdated, this is bad, I can't do this anymore, I'm so tired. The hard question is, what is it that is so fundamental that we cannot lose and we need to continue teaching, that is so important to our field? And so that is one of the areas I think we have to make sure that we continue that and bring that forward. And for me, right, I'm a librarian. Did I ever think I'd be working with computer scientist people from MIT? No way. But the fact is that they get it. They understand that we have something to bring to the table. And so the more we can have these kind of cross collaborations, I think it's important. So teaching that life cycle management. So I think it's significant, so significant. And yeah, so thank you. So do we have time for another? I think we're doing okay? Okay, last question, I guess. Okay, last question.
I'll try to be quick because
Last question, I'll be around. Thank you.
Yes,
I know.
so the evidence from various ongoing surveys, and we have here Professor Chaudhry, who is one of the initiators of an international survey, shows that the majority of researchers still store data only on their personal devices. So what should we do as a community to encourage these people to come to and bring their data into the repositories? Or should we just try to give more awareness of how they should handle their data in a better way? Because we will continue for a while to be in this situation of having a lot of research data in the wild, let's say, not deposited anywhere. So what is important, to improve the way they're handling their personal research data, or to push them towards bringing the data somewhere where they're curated in a more professional way?
Well, thank you. I think this is a grand challenge within our community. And the more that we can show evidence of positive results of data sharing and impact. So, you know, one is showing researchers how other researchers' data was used over time and how they got more known for their, you know, there's an ego involved, but more importantly, how research that has been shared has helped with a discovery or making an advancement. And so the kinds of things that I shared early on, the visuals about solving world hunger or curing cancer, to me, if you see this and you're not sharing your data or figuring out how to share your data, you really have no business being a researcher, because we have to address these challenges. And so educating. I have a conversation with my husband. My husband is a researcher, he's an engineer. And he, you know, early on, oh, you know, I don't have time, you know, to share data, whatever. Lately, he said, you know, I'm teaching a class and I really want some students to access some data. Where do I go? So, I mean, I think that it's time is going to be part of it too. But the more evidence we can show of success in data sharing and solving problems and sharing cases, sharing successful outcomes, I think the better we will be. So I'm looking, and I think I have to stop, and there's a break, and I'm around today, and I just thank you for letting me share this work, and look forward to talking with people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Jen Greenberg, for your insightful and very thought-provoking talk. I think we should now, we are about to have a coffee break, but before that, let me invite Assistant Professor Dr. Phimrampai Prem Samit to present our speaker a token of appreciation.